Chapter 7. Asking the Right Questions. When I was in elementary school, I learned to attach importance to things based on one's willingness to die for them. The whole idea of heroes usually involved a sacrifice of someone's life. Being willing to die for your country was the essence of patriotism. And as a young Catholic child, the chance to be a martyr for my faith was something I could only hope and pray for. I have an 80-year-old uncle who still brings up World War II every time I see him, because it was in the throes of that experience that he found his meaning. Whatever else he has done with his life, owning his own business, fathering 8 children, giving blood to the Red Cross at every opportunity, showing up at the funeral of everyone he knows in his small upstate New York town, these, in his mind, pale in comparison to the great heroism he experienced as a paratrooper in the Philippines. What he was willing to die for has colored his conversations for 60 years. We have learned to associate courage with risk and with the question, what are you willing to die for? But what if we ask, what are you willing to live for? If we determine for ourselves exactly what we choose to give our lives to, where we will direct our energy, what crises we'll work to ameliorate or prevent, then we set ourselves on a trajectory that takes mountainous courage to sustain. We need to refuel constantly to stay the course, to avoid obstacles, to overcome resistance from ourselves and others. When I was working as a freelance photojournalist, I attended a workshop given by a panel of photo editors from several mainstream magazines. There were 400 photographers in the room, and we were all trying to figure out how to get our photographs into their magazines. After the editors talked about their publications and what they were looking for, it was time for questions from the audience. I started to ask my question, which I thought was fairly astute, but I could tell from their body language that we didn't share the same opinion. I continued on, asking what the protocol would be if I was both writing the article and shooting the photographs for illustration. Should I send the query letter to the article's editor or the photo editor, I asked. I could tell by the rolling of their eyes that they were disgusted for some reason, but didn't know why until one editor said to me with a hint of disdain, "Look, honey, you can't be a photographer and a writer. You have to choose one or the other. And if you choose to photograph, you have to decide what you're going to photograph. We have our dog photographers, our cat photographers, our architectural photographers, our car photographers, our fashion photographers. You have to pick one and stick with it, or you'll never be taken seriously." The other panel members nodded their heads in agreement. I felt like the country bumpkin in the palace. It was a humiliating moment, and I slid out the side door as fast as I could. "Let's see," I asked myself, walking down the long corridor of the Jacob Javits Center. "What should I photograph? Dogs, cats, houses, cars?" I didn't get too far down the hallway before realizing my mistake. I was trying to fit into their rules. In order to become a photographer of one thing, I would have to give up what I was living for, which was photographing people and events and places and animals and everything I saw that gave me pause. I was living to see it all and capture as much as I could through my lens. Even though I already had one book of photographs and stories published by a prominent press, because of the photo editor's comments, I questioned myself immediately. They must know better, I thought. They're the decision makers. But by the time I reached the exit door, I had reached my conclusion. Their box was too small for me, and their rules way too confining. What if someone had said to Michelangelo, "Look, buddy, you have to make a choice between painting and sculpting. You can't do both." we'd have the Sistine Chapel or David, but not both. Instead of encouraging me to expand my vision, these experts wanted me to narrow it. The question was, what was I willing to give up? Whereas it should have been, what was I willing to give? I felt throttled and stifled in response to their question. The upshot was that I abandoned the freelance profession and went on to create work that was true to myself and worth living for. As thought leaders, it is our business to be asking questions of ourselves as well as others that help us all redefine what we are living for and why. The generation that is stepping up to leadership is a generation looking for curricula and challenges that have an impact, that engage the whole of their fertile imaginations in bridging the gaps we have failed to bridge thus far in our shaping of a culture. When Mahatma Gandhi was asked what he thought of Western civilization, his response was, "I think it would be a very good idea." In the wake of Hurricane Katrina, what's surfacing from the muddy waters is a clear awareness of our national and cultural shortcomings. Our conversations about morality have detoured into the realm of private and personal choice, while we neglect the most basic moral questions confronting us. How can we use our immense resources to balance the inequities in our own nation? What has to happen to feed the 12.9 million American children going hungry every day, to secure health care for every citizen, and to create affordable housing for the working poor and the 35.9 million people living below the poverty line in America? What we're in need of is thought leadership that leads people in two directions. First, into their own deep recesses where they can access their feelings, their desires, their most basic human instincts, and identify what it is they are truly called to. This is a leadership of creativity and imagination that frees people from their social conditioning, familial expectations, religious and cultural programming long enough to enable their unique originality to surface. It is a process of self-definition, a washing away of all that is not authentic, a clarifying of one's essence. The questions are personal. What activities bring you joy and peace? To what do you aspire? What do you perceive as obstacles to your success? What inspires you? If you could imagine yourself capable of fixing one broken thing or creating one thing that doesn't yet exist, what would it be? When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? What did you imagine that profession would give you? What would have to happen for you to have that now? Any deep inquiry into the self will lead to a heightened sense of our own interconnectedness and interdependence on each other. Who we are, in essence, is revealed to us through our interactions. What we value is revealed to us through our relationships with others. What gifts we have, what talents and abilities we possess, only become real when they are enacted in community. The very meaning of our lives only becomes apparent to us in our service to others. Given this, our next questions are directed outwardly. They pertain to the ways we manifest the gifts we discovered in our self-inquiry. They are questions that help us determine what to make of our talents. As an individual, how can I do what I love while being of use to others? As an organizational leader, how can I create a forum that calls forth the ingenuity of individuals and assists them in applying that toward communal solutions? As a business leader, how can I deliver profits to the shareholders while rewarding fairly all those who made those profits possible? As an educator, how can I make learning relevant and engage the students in real-life problem solving? 10 years ago, in a Subaru factory in Indiana, a few individuals decided to work together to reduce the impact their plant was making on the environment. Within 10 years, they became the first auto manufacturer to reach zero landfill status. They recycle everything that comes into their plant, and as a result, use less electricity while increasing productivity. This did not happen because a CEO had a bright idea and decided to enforce it. It happened because a few conscientious employees decided to take responsibility for doing the right thing. One organization that is inspiring its members to become active co-creators is the World Future Society, a nonpartisan, nonprofit, educational and scientific association with 30,000 members in over 80 countries and chapters in a number of cities. One partnership they've developed is with Global SchoolNet, a network of more than 90,000 online educators in 194 countries dedicated to helping young people become literate and responsible global citizens. In partnership with the World Future Society, Global SchoolNet sponsors an annual web-based cyber fair, which engages students from 582 schools in 109 countries in preparing for the future by thinking about their own future plans, the conditions that will affect the future of their community, and future issues of global importance. Now, in its 10th year, the contest has involved more than 1 million students from 4,500 schools and is the longest-running international cyber event for schools. Both World Future Society and Global SchoolNet inspire innovation among their members and are architects of programs that extend the reach of their creativity into the community at large. What makes them both so exemplary is their ability to partner with organizations, schools, universities, communities, and businesses to bring about the changes they want to see in the world. In the business arena, one retailer that stands out as a leader in conscious commerce is the natural and organic food supermarket, Whole Foods Market, Incorporated. They first opened in Texas in 1980, when there were less than half a dozen natural food supermarkets in the United States, and have since become a Fortune 500 company, and have appeared on Fortune magazine's 100 Best Companies to Work For list for 8 consecutive years. The company currently has 171 stores in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. A group of 60 employees, known as team members, drafted a declaration of interdependence that sits on their website and helps to explain their phenomenal success. Some of the notable characteristics at Whole Foods include: staff are all stockholders in the company. The stores show their commitment to their local communities by supporting food banks, sponsoring neighborhood events, and compensating their team members for community service work. No one makes more than 14 times the average salary. and they donate 5% of their after-tax profits to not-for-profit organizations. They have created an Animal Compassion Foundation to provide education and research services to ranchers and meat producers around the world who want to remain economically viable while maintaining standards of excellence for animal welfare. To do this, they are partnering with animal welfare advocacy groups and the farmers and ranchers they do business with. They have also established a Whole Planet Foundation, which is partnering with Earth University in Costa Rica, a university in Guatemala, the Grameen Trust of Bangladesh, to conduct a microloan program to help women in these areas develop their own micro-enterprises. Whole Foods is concentrating its efforts in the regions where it purchases pineapples, bananas, and coffee, and their goal is to assist up to 8,500 women in their efforts to become self-supporting entrepreneurs. They are beginning with an initial $2 million investment in 2005, but will continue to support the projects through the Global 5% Day, allocating 5% of all global sales on a designated day to microcredit loans. In a recent interview for What is Enlightenment magazine, co-president Walter Robb attributed Whole Foods' success to their principle-driven culture. They see themselves as co-creators of the future, and their business decisions are made with that in mind. They do not sell sea bass anymore because it is not being fished in a sustainable way. And they discontinued tilapia when they found out hormones were being used in the production of the fish. Says Robb, "We are not retailers who have a mission. We are missionaries who retail. At the very heart and soul of Whole Foods is the mission. We're here to make a real difference in people's health and well-being, in the health and well-being of the planet, and in creating a workplace based on love and respect. So we put our customers and team members before our shareholders. And if you compare our performance to other publicly traded food companies, it's superior. $1,000 invested in Whole Foods at the beginning in 1992 would be worth well over $30,000 now. Since we've been public, we've delivered a 25% compounded annual growth rate. Our return on invested capital is north of 35%. Those are some of the strongest numbers in the history of food retailing. Original thinking in the world of education is leading to some global-wide innovations that are as heart-touching as they are eye-opening. Curtis DeBerg, an accounting professor at California State University at Chico, is founder and director of Students for the Advancement of Global Entrepreneurship, called SAGE, an international network linking university students from several countries to high school students and business leaders in their communities. DeBerg's mission was to create an infrastructure rooted in both problem-based learning and community service learning that matched high school students with international college mentors and local business advisors. With the help of these mentors, the students complete projects related to entrepreneurship, community service, teaching others, civic engagement in a democracy, and environmental awareness. According to DeBerg, poverty is more often the expression of low productivity than lack of resources. Through the SAGE network, high school students are learning how to galvanize their creative energies and design entrepreneurial projects that are profitable and socially relevant. Students involved in the SAGE program come together annually for a World Cup competition, and each team has 15 minutes to make their presentation in English before more than 30 judges from academia, nonprofit organizations, and the business sector. The 2005 competition took place in San Mateo, California, and included student teams from 8 countries: the United States, Poland, Ghana, South Africa, Russian, Tajikistan, China, and Ukraine. With a sophisticated and audiovisual display as background to their presentation, the Ukraine high schoolers were judged the best. Among their award-winning projects were the publication of a 4-color magazine and the creation and management of a popular new music group in their home city of Odessa. There are exemplary programs in K-12 schools across the country, and one organization that is helping to spread the word about its practices that work is the George Lucas Educational Foundation, GLEF. Disenchanted with what school had to offer him as a child, the filmmaker Lucas asked himself what he could do to improve creativity in today's schools, and his foundation was the inspired answer. GLEF has 30 full-time employees, a $4 million annual budget, and headquarters on the founder's Skywalker Ranch in the Marin County Hills. It publishes Edutopia, a new magazine for a new world of learning, a monthly must-read for teachers that celebrates the renaissance of originality that is changing the face of American education. Lucas's goal is to document and disseminate information about effective, creative programs in K-12 schools to help these ideas spread nationwide. GLEF supports projects in both public and private schools, distributes an email newsletter, and maintains an extensive website that contains all of the multimedia content they have published since 1997. They provide free, downloadable teaching modules that were developed by education faculty and professional developers that can be used in the classroom, in workshops, or meetings. Detailed articles, research summaries, and links to hundreds of relevant websites, books, organizations, and publications are also available to help schools and communities build on successes in education. They have a robust collection of short online documentaries on classroom innovations that allow visitors to visualize what these innovations look like, as well as a multimedia compilation of success stories in our nation's schools. The GLEF staff has also developed multimedia programs of interest to educators, community leaders, and policymakers interested in gaining deeper insights into community partnerships with business and nonprofits, curricula integrating technology and real-world projects, and new approaches to assessing student learning. The journey for all conscious citizens is a twofold journey: the inward odyssey, which is private, personal, spiritual, whereby we encounter the nature of our desires, the elements of our morality, the raw materials of our meaning. This is where we burrow into the caverns of our own souls and ask ourselves who we are, what we care deeply about, what gifts we have to share, what light is ours to shine. This is where we honor our individuality, claim our unique talents, and come to terms with our power to create. It is through this process that we develop our ability to author our own lives, unearth our hidden strengths, and honor our true calling. What is the call that is beckoning you? What is the legacy you will be leaving behind? Chapter 8. Between Chaos and Certainty, Dwelling in the Mystery. The commander of the occupation troops said to the mayor of the mountain village, "We know you are hiding a traitor. Turn him over to us, or we will harass you and your people by every means in our power." The village was in fact hiding a man who seemed kind and innocent and was loved by all. But what could the mayor do now that the welfare of the village was at stake? The village council spent days discussing and arguing about what to do, but they could not agree on anything. So the mayor went to the village priest. They spent the whole night searching through scriptures, trying to decide what to do. Finally, they came to a text that said, "It is better that one man die to save the nation." So the mayor handed over the innocent man, and all night long the village was haunted by his cries as he was tortured and put to death. Many years later, a prophet came to the village and asked the mayor, "How could you have done this? That man was sent to save this country, and you handed him over to be killed. What possessed you to do such a thing?" "Where did I go wrong?" pleaded the mayor. "The priest and I looked at the scriptures and did what they commanded." "That's where you went wrong," said the prophet. "You looked at the scriptures. You should have looked into his eyes." The mayor and the priest spent the whole night searching through the scriptures, trying to decide what to do. Had they looked as well into their own hearts, or spoken with the man who was being hidden away, or polled the entire community, they may have reached a wiser conclusion. Instead, they relied on texts that in the end led them astray. In the face of a great challenge, they did not know how to, or perhaps even why to, summon forth a deeper wisdom, having learned to rely on their scriptures for the answers they sought. But it was their failure to do this that resulted in the tragedy. The mysteries we face today are equally challenging. The welfare of villages around the world is at stake, and no amount of wealth or weaponry can defend against the terrorism that is loose in the world. A deeper wisdom is called for now, and as a collective body, we contain it. No leader knows the answer. No individual knows the answer. No sacred text holds the answer. We, as a body of global citizens, contain the blueprint for a peaceful future. As Ken Wilber says, we are all right, only partly so. The wisdom of humanity is dispersed among its members, and the real leaders are those who can evoke that wisdom, summon the members to find their voices, and create a forum for them to be heard. In his fascinating book, The Wisdom of Crowds, James Surowiecki, the New Yorker magazine business columnist, makes the case that large groups of people are smarter than an elite few, no matter how bright those few may be. Groups are often smarter than the smartest people in them, and they do not need to be dominated by exceptionally intelligent people in order to be smart. Even if most people within the group are not especially well-informed or rational, it can still reach a collectively wise decision. Surowiecki cites the work of Scott Page, a political scientist at the University of Michigan, whose experiments with computer-simulated problem-solving agents revealed some interesting findings. Page set up groups of 10 to 20 agents, each endowed with a different set of skills, and had them solve a sophisticated problem. Individually, some did well at solving the problem, and some were less effective. What Page found was that a group made up of some smart agents and some not so smart agents almost always did better than a group made up just of smart agents. Adding in a few people who know less but have different skills actually improves the group's performance. Surowiecki asserts that bringing new members into the organization, even if they are less experienced or capable, actually makes the group smarter simply because what little the new members do know is not redundant with what everyone else knows. Diversity works. Today's internet is making it possible to get feedback from everywhere at warp speed. Television shows like Dancing with the Stars and American Idol are hearing from voters across the globe and trusting in the wisdom of the crowds to determine their winners. Even NASA engaged in a recent online experiment to see if the collective judgment of ordinary people might be helpful in finding and classifying craters on Mars. They called the experiment Click Workers, and anyone who wanted to could visit the site, go through a brief training session, and then register their ideas with a click of a mouse. As it turns out, the collective judgment of the group was virtually indistinguishable from that of a geologist with years of experience in identifying Mars craters. While the priest and the mayor were stymied in the face of an awful decision, had they polled the villagers for a collective idea, most likely they would have arrived at a more inspiring solution. But they were not original thinkers. Perceiving themselves as the leaders, it did not occur to them to look beyond themselves and the village council for answers, especially to the common villagers. When they had exhausted their own mental resources, they turned only to their scriptures. They never turned to the man who seemed kind and innocent and was loved by all. They resisted the complexities of human emotion, the challenge of engaging the entire community. A literal answer from the sacred text was the easy way out. Look, it says it right here. It must be right. It's our sacred scripture. And this was the fatal flaw. They stopped there. Answering the questions that are besieging us now calls for a plunging of our whole beings into the dilemmas presented in every morning newspaper. Relying solely on sacred text is an invitation for chaos and polarization. There will always be those who want to turn the other cheek, and those who want an eye for an eye, and each will be right according to their choice. Fear is in the air now because each side is building a formidable case for its rightness, and the energy that might be spent on solving the problems is going into proving the other side wrong. The butterfly will never get off the ground if the right wing is at war with the left wing. The answers that we are seeking lie between right and left, and the only way to access them is to move toward the other, to repair the opposites. But one look at our culture, from our religions to our media to our politics, reveals a history of opposition, a divide and conquer disposition. We have exported American culture to nearly every country in the world, and people are getting a look at affluence. They wonder why they have to struggle so hard when Americans have it so easy, or so it seems. And there's the big mystery. Why is the gap so huge? Why do we allow such disparity in the distribution of wealth? What do we say to people who are starving in our own country as well as abroad? The internet and the media are the nervous system of the global body, and our synapses are more connected now than ever before. Years ago, we had to rely on National Geographic for pictures of our brothers and sisters from far away. But now we see them every day on CNN. I have passed by bamboo huts in the middle of a rice field outside Bangkok and seen the flickering blue light of a television screen. We see them, they see us. Our glimpses into each other's lives are giving shape to the greatest questions of our times, and we will not find our answers in books, or facts, or science, or religion, or anything that has been constructed by minds from another age. The problems we face can only be solved when we stop looking behind us for answers and begin looking within and around us. Our insights will come from communion and convergence, and this must happen both within ourselves and in our relationships with others. Because of the nature of our political system and the tendency of the media to emphasize our polarities, we as a country have become terribly divided. More walls are being built every day between the left and the right, at a time when we need to be building bridges and making new meanings from the mysteries of these times. Our challenge is to awaken as individuals from whatever trance we're in and do what we need to reclaim our power, our voice, our culture. It is time now to repattern our thought processes and disavow all notions of our powerlessness as individuals. It is the thoughts and actions of individuals that have created the world we experience today, and it will be the thoughts and actions of individuals that create the world we will live in tomorrow. A prerequisite for original thinking is the ability to dwell in mystery, to be comfortable in that space between the dissolution of old ideas and the emergence of the new. We need to be courageous and humble enough to suspend our beliefs long enough to incorporate, to bring into ourselves the beliefs of others that differ from ours, for it is the blending of these two that causes the combustion of original thought. As Leonard Shlain reminds us in Art and Physics, opposites are not always contradictions. Rather, they may be complementary aspects of a higher truth. Dissolving our mental barriers to opposing ideas is a heroic act. All our conditioning is against it. We are programmed to believe certain things and to defend those beliefs, but there is no absolute truth to defend. We have magazines that cater to the left and magazines that cater to the right, and both are busy proving the other side wrong. Facts are manipulated to serve the purposes of different constituencies, from the relevance of global warming to the needs of hungry children. Just as we can find opposing arguments in our sacred texts, so can we find opposing ideas in the scientific, economic, and political arenas, all based on the same facts. There is no right or wrong on the level of the absolute. There is only the continual evolution of ideas. And if we want to participate in this evolution, become an agent in shaping it, then we have to become the vessel in which the opposites fuse and transmute into a higher form. Just as it takes centuries of heat and pressure to transform carbon minerals into precious diamonds, so are we refined in the friction and fray of human discourse. Years ago, when I was making a cross-country trip, interviewing small-town folks about their values, I made my way to the homestead of a friend's mother in Kentucky. Her name was Babe. She was 72 and lived with her brother Arthur, who was 88. When I drove up the long driveway, Babe was sitting on the porch rocking in her rattan rocker. She waved me up, fetched me a glass of lemonade, and regaled me with tales for the next few hours. When we went into the house, Babe showed me around, saying, "This is Arthur's room," at the entrance to the living room. Arthur was out somewhere, so I hadn't met him, but as soon as I saw all the literature on his coffee table, I knew all I needed to know. This man was an ultra-conservative, militaristic, fundamentalist, and I didn't want to have anything to do with him. In fact, I was glad he was gone. Halfway through supper with Babe, in walked Arthur, big as life and gruff as a bear. Babe babbled on about how I was an author, writing this big article on values, and how he ought to talk to me. I nearly choked on my okra. The last thing I wanted to do was talk to Arthur. But he told me to meet him on the porch at 8 o'clock the next morning, and he'd tell me whatever I needed to know. Bright and early the next morning, I ventured out to the porch with my notebook and pen. Arthur was already there, with an old gray golfer's cap on his head and a hand-carved cane in tow. "Come on," he barked, setting off across the lawn. "Get a move on." "I thought I was going to interview you," I said. "Can't you walk and talk? Hurry up. Time's a-wasting." Leaving my notebook in the chair, I took off after Arthur, agitated already. He started talking about the lumber business he used to own, what kind of trees were on the property, how he knew the land like the back of his hand. Then he stopped in his tracks and pointed at a tree with his cane. "Look over there at that walnut tree," he said. "Can you tell me how in the world that tree spits out those walnuts that are so hard I can't crack 'em with my hands? Even them squirrels have to crack 'em on a rock just to get 'em open. What power's loose in the world that can make that happen year after year?" We walked a bit further, then he stopped again, pointing his cane at the nearby garden. "Look over there at those rows of corn. Why, I just planted those seeds a while ago, and now look, row after row of perfect stalks, with the silkiest golden tassels you ever did see. And do you know what you're going to find when you pull off those tassels and husk those ears? You're going to find row after row of golden kernels, all lined up just as perfect as can be. You tell me, girl, what power's loose in the world that can make that happen?" I was amazed. This was a man who I'd taken for my opposite. A man I didn't want to talk to. A man I'd boxed into the category other and written off as a person to avoid. And now he was ushering me around his land, opening his heart, unfolding the details of his love affair with nature. We walked for 2 hours, through the woods, down to the creek, across the meadows, and all the while Arthur spoke of the birds, the flowers, the maples, the oaks, as if they were miracles of life going unnoticed. My listening was a vessel for his secrets, a temple for his sacred thoughts. My questions drew the light from his deepest places. My laughter met his gruffness and turned it into joy. We were yin and yang, Arthur and I, and on that 2-hour walk we fell in love. He insisted I stay a few more days, and every morning we'd walk the land as Arthur talked about the trees and nature, his personal beliefs, his troubled life. We had taken up emotional residence in each other's being, and it was no longer possible to think of him as other. Arthur had become my brother in spirit, my friend, and a mirror to myself. His opinions, different as they were from my own, were easier to understand, knowing their context and how they were formed. I had to think more broadly with Arthur in my life, and for this I'm grateful. Before I left, Arthur confessed to his lifelong dream of seeing the great sequoia trees out west. I waited too long, it'll never happen now, but that's something I dreamed of since I was a boy, he said. Arthur, it's not too late, I said. You can still get there. No, it's too late, he insisted, my own damn fault. I just waited too long. After that, when I was on the road, I'd always look for postcards with pictures of trees. Dear Arthur, I'd write, it's not too late. There's still time. Get to the redwoods. Love, Jan. I must have sent him dozens of cards. Months went by, and I finally made it back to my home in Syracuse. When I collected my mail, what a surprise to find a postcard from Arthur, from the Sequoia National Forest. Dear Jan, if it hadn't been for you, I'd never have made it. These trees make me cry like a baby. What power's loose in this world? I love you, Arthur. My relationship with Arthur lasted a few years until he died, and it taught me one of my biggest lessons, that there is a great advantage to exploring the minds of people whose opinions are different from mine. While there is a kind of friction as opposing thoughts rub against each other, there is also the potential for creative fire that comes with that friction. And as original thinkers, that's what we're after. Chapter 9, The Creative Enterprise. A few years ago, I was visiting my friend Ruby Lee in southern Kentucky. When Sunday morning rolled around, we climbed into her 1972 yellow Oldsmobile and headed off to the Baptist church. While we were waiting for the service to start, Ruby Lee leaned over and told me in a hushed voice to check out the women at the organ. She's the minister's wife, she whispered, but he's having an affair with that blonde woman in the second row of the choir. The wife's so mad she's spitting nails and she won't even look at him during the service anymore. Next thing I knew, the organist was hammering out the processional hymn, her face starched into a sour scowl. The blonde in the choir was radiant, singing her heart out and smiling adoringly at the minister as he took his place on the altar. The organist nibbled constantly at her bottom lip and avoided eye contact with anyone in the church. The balding, overweight minister swaggered to the pulpit like he owned the world. Brothers and sisters, he bellowed as he raised his arms in a welcoming gesture to the crowd. Today we're here to speak of our enemies and to follow the Lord's call to love those enemies. I wasn't sure yet who or what he meant by the enemy, but he said the word with such vehemence it gave me a fright. I looked over at Ruby Lee to see what she made of this, and she was nodding her head in zealous approval. Ruby Lee was 72 years old. She had spent nearly every Sunday of her life in this church, and for her, it was business as usual. As the minister launched into his sermon, his deep voice rose to a fevered pitch, and his robe billowed like a mainsail when he flailed his arms. The organist by this time was clipping her fingernails, and the blonde was sitting on the edge of her choir chair, wrapped in devotion to the minister of her dreams. I tried to follow what he was saying, but every time he roared out the word enemy, I just cringed in the pew. After a while, it was all I heard. Enemy this, enemy that. It was hard for me to stay focused on the subject of enemies, since I'd spent my whole life trying not to have any. What I really wanted to do was go up to that pulpit and tell people to get past the whole idea of enemies, because it doesn't serve us anymore. But I stayed where I was, wondering if anyone considered me an enemy, just because of what I think. When we got into the car after the service, I told Ruby Lee what I was feeling. Don't you think it's time to move beyond this enemy thing? Don't you think we have to get past what keeps us separate from each other and figure out what we have in common? She threw her old into reverse and backed up right into the chain-link fence. Girl, you sure got some crazy ideas up there. Let's go get lunch. We headed off to the local hospital for their Sunday brunch, but I couldn't get the minister off my mind. There he was with a captive audience and a chance to make a difference in people's lives. He had all the benefits of theater, with the music, the rituals, the stage of the holy altar. He took a reference from the Bible and created a performance piece on the theme of enemy. And each of us perceived it through our own filters. Had there been critics in the congregation, some would have panned him, others applauded. On some level, we are all creators whether we intend to be or not. As we perform our lives, there are always people watching us, listening for clues, looking for differences, assessing our actions, our words. We constantly create environments which others enter into and feel either nourished or negated. We create waves of energy that wash over people in our presence, waves that can lull and comfort or lash and damage. We create what our days and nights look like, what work we do, what beauty surrounds us. And on a daily basis, we create the attitude we bring to life and choose whether the door to our heart is open or closed. Like the preacher at the pulpit or the artist at her palette, we each create something for others to respond to, whether it is a sermon to ponder, a painting to look at, or something as intangible as a safe space to be in. And just like those churchgoers, we are taking in everyone else's performance, listening for clues about what to think. The minister's agenda was to inspire the congregation to think about enemies as he thought about enemies. My agenda, had I a chance at the pulpit, would have been to inspire people to think as I thought about enemies. Years later, another approach comes to mind. That would be to address the subject in such a way that people could see both sides. Then they would have to tap into their intuition, draw from their personal experience, and synthesize this with the two perspectives to come up with a new and original thought on the subject. They would not abdicate their power to the minister or to me. They would use our thoughts to stimulate their own, and leave church that day with new insights gained from the merging of our words and their experience. This is the alchemy of creativity, the process of original thinking. It takes place in the realm of the imaginal, the inner frontier, which is the last and most fertile frontier to explore. It is not our role to encourage people what to think, to convert people to our side, whether it is the right or the left. It is our role to become bridges between the two, to create a new thoroughfare for thinking that supersedes the binary and finds its strength in the whole. To come to our challenges like an artist calls for a great letting go. It demands of us the willingness to replace a vernacular of blame and criticism with a language of openness and kindness. It demands a spiritual depth and an emotional breadth that enables us to honor another as ourself. It demands that we embody compassion and speak like our words are the seeds of tomorrow. It takes more than a vision to make a visionary. It takes a rigorous discipline of thought management and a meticulous undoing of old habits. It requires the capacity to not simply withstand the tension of opposites, but to become the mechanism for their transformation, to contain and direct the power that is generated as they fuse and ignite. Just as a battery cable needs to be connected to the positive and negative poles to give it the power to recharge a dead battery, so it is with us. If we learn to bring the opposites together in our own lives, then we learn as well the alchemy of creation. We become practitioners in the art of generating power, authentic, unitive power, which is the medium of leadership itself. We're exposed to so many contradictions these days, it's hard to know where to turn for facts that are unadulterated by someone's spin. In researching for this book, I found that just when I had accumulated a substantial file of information in support of an idea, on another day I'd find a treasure chest of facts that supported its opposite. For 3 years, Enron was named one of the 100 best companies to work for in America. It received 6 environmental awards in 2000, 1 praise from environmentalists for environmental lobbying, and was a favorite on many social responsibility investment indices. Their corporate values emphasize communication, integrity, and respect. After Enron's fall, one of the hotter items on eBay was a 64-page paperback, the elegantly written Enron Corporate Code of Ethics. Never been opened, according to the former employee who was selling it. On my desk now are 3 articles about Walmart. One announces that on one day in 2002, Walmart sales total exceeded the GNPs of 36 countries. It reports that a typical employee hourly wage is $8, and that half of Walmart's U.S. employees qualify for food stamps. Walmart employees compose the largest single group in the state of Washington's low-income health program. While more than 2/3 of the employees are women, less than 10% hold management positions. A Fortune magazine article reports on how Walmart flexed its massive distribution muscle to deliver supplies to victims of Hurricane Katrina. If the federal government would have responded as quickly as Walmart, we could have saved more lives, claimed Jefferson Parish Sheriff Harry Lee. Walmart trucks arrived with supplies and water days before the Red Cross and FEMA. The company set up a phone bank in Bentonville to take calls from displaced employees and eventually non-employees who needed assistance. They appealed to their army of truck drivers to haul food to the shelters in the flood zone. They gave bullets and holsters to local police and National Guardsmen. They gave $20 million in cash and supplies. Walmart was there when no one else was. Paul Krugman, op-ed columnist for the New York Times and winner of the John Bates Clark Medal for the best American economist under the age of 40, writes about George W. Bush and Harkin Energy. He informs us that Mr. Bush acquired his position on the board of directors and audit committee when Harkin paid $2 million for Spectrum 7, a tiny, money-losing energy company with large debts. Mr. Bush was CEO of Spectrum 7. Krugman writes, explaining what it was buying, Harkin's founder said, "His name is George Bush." Harkin was also losing money, but in 1989 hid most of its losses with the profits it reported from selling a subsidiary, Aloha Petroleum, at a high price. As it turns out, Aloha was bought by a group of Harkin insiders who got most of the money for the purchase by borrowing from Harkin itself. Eventually, the Securities and Exchange Commission ruled that this was a phony transaction and forced the company to restate its 1989 earnings. Only a few weeks before bad news that could not be concealed caused Harkin's shares to tumble, Mr. Bush sold off 2/3 of his stake for $848,000, writes Krugman. Oddly, though the law requires prompt disclosure of insider sales, he neglected to inform the SEC about this transaction until 34 weeks had passed. An internal SEC memorandum concluded that he had broken the law, but no charges were filed. This, everyone insists, had nothing to do with the fact that his father was president. When Ann Coulter, UPS syndicated columnist, refers to these events in her book, How to Talk to a Liberal If You Must, she writes, "The facts are Bush sold his stock in Harkin Energy to purchase the Rangers. The price of stock later went down. The imputation of criminality to Bush is so ludicrous that even in the girly girl eye-poking attacks on the New York Times op-ed page, it has been roundly admitted that there is no question of any criminality and that Mr. Bush broke no laws." So there we have it. Half of us will believe Krugman, the other half will go with Coulter, and our adolescent war between the worlds will continue until enough of us realize that Rome is burning and put down our fiddles. We don't need to conjure up evidence about who is wrong and who is right. We need to take a look at what needs fixing and get out our toolkits. Whether or not we consider ourselves artists, we are all in the business of creating our lives and co-creating the culture we live in. Each of us is here to bring to life that something that's unique to us. None of us is aiming for triteness, in pursuit of the shallow. It's greatness we're after, and not some hollow applause coming from somewhere beyond us, but the deep down thrill of knowing we went all out, put our soul into something, created a life that sparked something new, had an impact, made a difference. This is why our creative work is so essential. It is not pointless or foolhardy. It is an act of faith, an act of kindness, crucial to our own healing and the healing of the planet. To create is to make something whole from the pieces of our lives, and in the process, to become more whole ourselves. It is a healing act, a leave-taking from the chaos as we move from the choppy surface toward the stillness of the center. The creative journey is a heroic enterprise. It is a brave pilgrimage to the center of our lives where we mine our depths for what seeks to be released, transmuting one thing into another, turning tragedies and triumphs into new forms conjured in our private hours and offered to others like food for the soul a rap against the chill. It demands our stillness and rapt attention, calls for courage as we pass through the dark on the way to the light. And this is the journey that defines the new mythmaker. This is the journey home to ourselves, where we discover what we know and what to make of it. This is the journey where we humbly accept our role as a co-creator and commit to bringing our light into the world. In a world as divided as ours, there is a great opening for voices that can unify, words that can weave our tattered pieces back into their original oneness. It is a creative endeavor that involves as much spirit as thought and calls for a most illuminated imagination, which exists right now in the center of each of us. It may be sluggish from disuse or enshrouded in fear or doubt, but it is there, waiting to be rediscovered, dusted off, and deployed into service. And what is it that brings our imaginations back to life? What is it that lures our creativity out of its hibernating state? It is exposure to the imaginative work of others. It is the arts that wake us up, that shake us out of our numbness and reel us back into the circle of life. And I'm not referring to the high arts of opera, classical music, ballet, though these surely do the trick, but to the common arts of storytelling, music making, singing, poetry. The arts reflect us to ourselves. They are a mirror of our magnitude, evidence of our power as alchemists to transform the lead of our daily lives into stories and images that heal and nudge. Art returns us to a sense of relatedness, because true art, while it may be channeled through one artist, comes from the common soul. Its reference is universal. It points to the whole and is sourced from the whole. In A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf writes, "Masterpieces are not single and solitary births. They are the outcome of many years of thinking in common, of thinking by the body of the people, so that the experience of the mass is behind the single voice." This experience of the mass is what gives art its healing power, its prophetic strength and durability. Artists are the ones who make the invisible visible, who give words and colors and sounds and shapes to the human adventure. They portray it in such a way that we understand more clearly who we are, how we are connected. Italian poet and Nobel Prize winner Salvatore Quasimodo said that poetry is the revelation of a feeling that the poet believes to be interior and personal, but which the reader recognizes as his own. Poetry, like all the arts, helps us find ourselves. It is neither feminine nor masculine, but the perfect blending of the two. It is where the wild woolliness of our physical being joins with the deep holiness of our spiritual being, giving birth to a new entity that expands the magic and meaning of both. Poetry awakens the imagination, stimulates the intellect, stirs the deep waters of our intuition, opening new doors to originality and thought and action. There is a host of gifted poets who maintained full-time careers in the business world and fulfilled themselves by writing poetry at night. T.S. Eliot worked in the international department of Lloyd's Bank in London. Wallace Stevens was vice president of Hartford Accident and Indemnity, a corporate lawyer and an expert on surety bonds. Archibald MacLeish was a lawyer who spent a decade as editor of Fortune magazine. A.R. Ammons was a salesman for a scientific glass manufacturer in New Jersey. Richard Hugo spent 13 years working for the Boeing Company in Seattle. William Carlos Williams was an obstetrician when he wrote the words, "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." Another executive poet, James Autry, used the workplace as grist for nearly all his poems. Before he retired in 1991, Autry was senior vice president at Meredith Corporation and president of its magazine group, a $500 million operation with over 900 employees. In his book, Love and Profit, The Art of Caring Leadership, he writes, "Wherever did we get the notion that in management there is a reasonable and acceptable separation of the intellect and spirit? That in our work world terms, the intellect controls the rational work life and the spirit is relegated to the soft stuff of romance, family, and religion? Where did it come from, all this hiding of emotion, of the spirit, of passion, behind some cool mask of macho detachment? I wonder if it is that business is considered too important to be diluted by all those feelings, or is it that business is not considered important enough to deserve them? Either way is wrong." Autry did not draw a line between his creative persona and his business persona, but found a way to fuse the two. When he walked through his office doors, he did not leave his heart behind, or his spirit. He was aware that every moment, every meeting, every encounter was a moment of creation, and he brought the fullness of his entire being to the business at hand. This is what the creative enterprise is all about. It's about connecting the threads from our minds to our hearts, from ourselves to others, from our souls to the world. It's a moment-by-moment transmutation of energy into matter, where we take the raw materials of our emotions, our ideas, our sensibilities and experiences, and convert them into stories and relationships, actions and creations that have an energy of their own. Creativity is the energy that flows through us naturally when our emotional, spiritual, and mental channels are fully opened. We are creative by default. It's our nature, our natural destiny. The only thing we have to learn is how to keep our channels open, and this calls for practice on every level. We have to practice feeling our emotions. We have to practice our spirituality, however we experience it. And we have to practice thinking and speaking our own thoughts, arriving at our own conclusions in the face of polarizing contradictions. And when we have practiced enough that we wake up each day knowing it is ours to create as we choose, feeling confident enough to call ourselves creative, then we will be ready to help others clear their channels and offer the world the gift of their originality. It is this simple process that will restore us to wholeness as individuals, as sisters and brothers, as co-creators and custodians of this beautiful planet. Chapter 10. Prophets and Profits, Capitalizing on Wisdom. For centuries, our wise elders, the prophets, have been trying to talk sense into us. Every spiritual tradition encourages compassion and good works, inner awareness and outer generosity. The Talmud tells us that whoever saves one life saves the world entire. Mohammed said, "There is a key for everything, and the key to paradise is love for the poor." Buddha said that if we knew the results of giving and sharing, we would not eat without having given. A Hopi elder explains, almost everything we do is a religious act from the time we get up to the time we go to sleep. How can the white man ever understand that? The Quran states, "Wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God." James says in the New Testament that faith, if it doesn't lead to action, is dead. And an Ethiopian wise woman reminds us that when spiders unite, they can tie up a lion. Here we are on planet Earth with one precious life to live, and what are most of us caught up in? The quest for money. Living takes money. Business takes money. Growth takes money. So the question is, how can we tend to the business at hand without living divided lives? How can we bring our spiritual values into workplaces driven by the bottom line? How can we live with a Hopi awareness that every act is a spiritual act and align our actions with our inner wisdom and social values? Original thinking is ignited by the fusion of opposites, and the challenge of merging spiritual values with material realities is sparking creativity in every arena. Spirituality is like breath. It is our vital force, and it is communicated more in how we speak than what we say. It shows up in how we listen, in how attentive we are, how present to others. Where religion is the word, spirituality is the meaning. It's in the choices we make, the values we embody, the stands we take. Little is gained from conversations about religion, but action rooted in love and compassion can move mountains. The United States was founded on the principles of keeping church and state separate, and we have all been trained to separate our spiritual lives and our work lives. But in essence, spirituality is not about the church. It's about our relationships with each other. Religion is about our beliefs and what we think. Spirituality is about our values and how we act. Traditionally, in the matter of business and economics, values have not figured into the equations for success. Business decisions have been made with one thing in mind, profit, and social costs, no matter how devastating, are externalized in a value-free context. An example of this is when General Motors came out with their Chevrolet Malibu in 1979. Prototype tests indicated that the fuel tank was too close to the rear bumper, significantly increasing the risk of fire in the event of a collision. But GM did nothing about it. As it turned out, 2 women and 4 children were severely burned after an accident in their Malibu. And during the trial, 2 internal memos surfaced that explained GM's rationale. One stated that gas tanks should be placed no closer than 15 inches to the rear bumper, and that the Malibu's gas tank was 11 inches from the bumper. It would cost the company $8.59 per car to fix this. But in a value analysis memo, a GM engineer calculated that deaths from such accidents would cost the company only $2.40 per automobile, so GM made a decision not to fix it. Business as usual. These are the kinds of decisions that are made when we draw a dividing line between our business and spiritual selves. When we fail to integrate our values into our everyday choices, we end up living divided lives, and the whole is shattered into fragments. An executive would never think of pouring chemicals into his child's sandbox or filling her family's pool with polluted water. But somehow there is permission to poison the environment of others if it makes good business sense. This is a dangerous disconnect that is becoming apparent to many business leaders, and several have been organizing to change things. In 1999, the Dalai Lama said during a conference in Amsterdam that business is the only thing that will have an influence on the future of this planet. A few years later, Sander Tiedemann co-authored a book with the Dalai Lama, which contains a rare exchange between the Dalai Lama and business and economics leaders from around the world. Tiedemann, after a career in law and banking, co-founded and currently chairs Spirit in Business, a fast-growing network organization promoting ethics and values in the business world. More than 500 executives, consultants, entrepreneurs, and spiritual leaders attended a 3-day conference to launch the Spirit in Business World Institute in 2002, and over 4,000 individuals from 30 countries have been involved with SIB. Companies are learning to develop mechanisms that measure the human and business impact of spirituality-based programs, apply learning modules on compassion and trust throughout their organization, and improve decision-making by focusing stakeholders in a common vision through a broad concept of spirituality. We're also learning that mindfulness, with its offspring, forgiveness, and compassion, leads to improved health and increased wealth. Dr. Frederick Luskin, a researcher at Stanford University who specializes in the connection between spirituality and health, initiated the Stanford Forgiveness Project to look at the effectiveness of forgiveness intervention. In one study, 13 American Express financial advisors and 3 vice presidents were given a 1-day training in emotional competence focusing on forgiveness. Each advisor was offered follow-up through 4 conference calls over the subsequent year. At the end of the study, a reduction of 25% was seen in stress. Participants showed a gain of 20% in positive emotion and an increase of 18.3% in gross sales. The rest of their market group showed a corresponding gain of 10.4% in gross sales over the year. With statistics like these, it's no wonder that companies and organizations with visionary leadership are introducing values-based programs into their corporate cultures. Other discussions and projects at the Stanford Research Institute led to the founding of the World Business Academy, a not-for-profit established to explore and clarify the fundamental paradigm shifts underway globally in business, government, academia, and the public. The Academy sponsors and disseminates leading-edge research by scholars, business leaders, and visionaries. Its goal is to enable its members to integrate this knowledge into their lives and business practices, and to disseminate it into the world to rekindle the human spirit in business. The WBA maintains that since business has become the most powerful institution on the planet, it needs to adopt a new tradition of responsibility for the whole, which means that it needs to redefine its own interest in a wider perspective of society. Philosopher, social scientist, and futurist Willis Harman sensed the beginning of this evolution. In an article called Why a World Business Academy, Harman wrote, "A re-spiritualization of society is taking place, but one more experiential and non-institutionalized, less fundamental and sacerdotal than most of the historically familiar forms of religion. Science, in turn, is reassessing its foundation assumptions to better accommodate the human spirit and the conscious awareness that comprise our most direct link with reality. Such a change in basic assumptions must inevitably be accomplished by a long-term shift in value emphases and priorities. According to Harmon, the socio-political transformation we are now undergoing is actuated by the push of the global dilemmas and the pull of a vision of what could be. It is that very tension between what is and what could be that is causing an eruption of evolved thinking like we've never seen before. Old systems and institutions are self-destructing before our eyes, and new ways of being and doing are rising like a phoenix from their ashes. Just as technology has exponentially changed our ways of doing business, so has it altered our ways of perceiving reality. People are beginning to think and feel in nonlinear ways. The World Wide Web is not just a place to visit for research and communication. It is a metaphor of our connectedness, the architecture of our engagement. We are in touch as we've never been in touch before, and our enhanced accessibility to each other is causing a dramatic escalation not only in communication, but in human consciousness. Out of sight, out of mind is no longer plausible in a world where we have instant access to images and the imaginations of our sisters and brothers all over the planet. As the Persian poet Rumi writes, "We began as mineral, we emerged into plant life, and into the animal state, and then into being human, and always we have forgotten our former states, except in early spring, when we slightly recall being green again." We may have forgotten our former states, but from the moment our consciousness evolved, we have been active co-creators in the planetary enterprise. Evolution is not happening to us, but through us. And the fact that we have created a technology that connects us like cells in a neural network is a telling thing. Universal intelligence is coursing through us as it courses through every atom in every cell. It is the source of our inspiration. As the writer Doris Lessing once said, "I didn't have a thought, there was a thought around." All of our inventions and creations come from this intelligence, which is the same force that causes the seed to burst through its husk and journey upward in search of the light. Constant change, constant progress, constant adaptation. It is the nature of being. And what we are undergoing in our own evolutionary cycle is the same natural process that amoebas undergo when their survival is threatened. They unite. Einstein once wrote that something deeply hidden had to be behind things. This deeply hidden thing, what some think of as God or Brahman or Yahweh or nature or electricity with a capital E, as my brother refers to it, this is the force that unites us, that compels us toward compassion and pulls on our consciousness like the moon on the waves. It causes us to think differently, to perceive more multidimensionally, to sense what is needed in times of crises, and to move decisively in the direction of life. Though we have not officially placed humankind on the endangered species list, the decisions we are making in the name of progress may put us there soon. We've given carte blanche to economic development and are just beginning to calculate staggering toll it has taken on the very resources we need to live. But the organism that is hosting us, our Mother Earth, is well aware, and the survival mechanisms are kicking in. Evolution is making a quantum leap, and it is doing it through our consciousness. And just like in the fall, when the leaves start to change, each leaf changes in its own time, according to its nature and cellular composition. And we, like those leaves, are changing in our own time. Some of us have a complete and visceral sense of the human community. Some comprehend what is happening and are actively and consciously reaching out, creating networks, building community. And for some, the change is more subtle, a heightened interest in spirituality, a hungering for more meaning, a disenchantment with materialism, and a longing for connectedness. As the intelligence surges through us, we become motivated to express our higher natures, to care for each other, and to put systems in place that are healthy, holistic, and good for the whole. As agents of evolution, we are converting this intelligence into informed action, just as those leaves convert water and carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen. Photosynthesis is the work of plants. Infosynthesis is the work of humans. There is more information in the daily news than our ancestors were exposed to in their entire lives. And our job as a human race is to absorb it and use it for the benefit of the whole, as our bodies metabolize food for the benefit of every cell. Part of this process, at this point in our survival, is a reevaluation of the systems now in place. At no other time in history have we taken such a critical look at our own constructions, our businesses, our institutions, our politics, and public policies. In every milieu, evolving minds are dissecting the structures on which we've built our culture, repairing parts we have torn asunder, and calling attention to tears in the fabric we have wrapped ourselves in as American citizens. Everything is on trial in this evolutionary advance, and our concerns for the future are leading us inward. Like butterflies wrapped in the dark cocoon, we are saying goodbye to our caterpillar selves and doing what we can to prepare our beings for the great transformation. This is what's known as spiritual work, this inner looking, this letting go, and it is calling us by name, one by one. In every field, there are leaders emerging, challenging the old and creating the new. No institution is spared examination, and no assumptions remain unchallenged. As the visionary physicist David Bohm writes in his groundbreaking book on dialogue, intelligence requires that you don't defend an assumption. The greatest leaders in any field are those who are challenging themselves and others to release their grip on how it is and explore the question of how it might be better. Douglas North, winner of the 1993 Nobel Prize in Economics, writes, "We live in an uncertain and ever-changing world that is continually evolving in new and novel ways. Standard theories are of little help in this context. Attempting to understand economic, political, and social change requires a fundamental recasting of the way we think." A few assumptions that are being re-examined from a more holistic point of view are the notions that it is acceptable to have the economy be the dominant institution with more power than anything else, that the singular function of business is to provide rewards to investors, and that there is little relationship between material development and spiritual concerns. Research in all the sciences is proving that the cultivation of values such as insight, compassion, and generosity is what leads to true happiness and wholeness, not just for individuals, but for organizations and society as well. For ages we have discounted such intangibles as spiritual values, seduced by tenets of economics that said it makes no sense to devote time, effort, or expense to maintaining values if money can be made by ignoring them. And now, economics itself is under attack, beginning with a student rebellion against dogmatism in economics that began in France in June 2000. After spreading to Cambridge, England, and reverberating around the world, the movement is erupting in universities across the U.S. Over 700 Harvard students and alumni have signed a petition addressed to the Harvard Economics Department, asking it to approve a new introductory economics course that would cover a broad spectrum of views, examine the assumptions of economics, and challenge students to think critically. What they are rallying for is a plurality of approaches and an economics with conscience. A memo signed by Lawrence Summers, president of Harvard University, when he served as chief economist for the World Bank, gives an idea of the kind of economics they are calling into question. The memo addressed the subject of dumping the toxic wastes of the industrial world on the less developed world. It was written in December 1999 by World Bank economist Lant Pritchett and signed by Summers. Phrases from the memo include, "Just between you and me, shouldn't the World Bank be encouraging more migration of dirty industries to the less developed countries? I think the economic logic behind dumping a load of toxic waste in the lowest wage country is impeccable, and we should face up to it." Decisions of this nature may make economic sense on some level, but they are neither inspired nor inspiring. Economics, from this perspective, is cold, calculating, and brutal, and it is not surprising that students and academics are calling for a rethinking of the entire system. People are tuning into the reality that we are ultimately interdependent, and when they realize this, a tectonic shift occurs in their being. As we grow to embrace and understand our interrelatedness, the quality of our relationships begin to matter. People begin to respond to the energy in an organization, to distinguish between colleagues who drain them and colleagues who sustain them. The corporate culture becomes more important as people seek out meaning and authenticity in their workplace. More is expected, more is demanded, and when people feel enlivened on a spiritual level, more is given. It's no surprise, then, that according to research, a company's performance is at least 30% attributable to the corporate culture where these values play out. When we feel inspired, from the same root word as spiritus, then we are more creative, more imaginative, more productive. And we feel inspired when we are seen by other people, when they recognize our gifts and acknowledge our uniqueness. Spirituality in the workplace pertains to our relationships and our commitments to support our colleagues. If the culture itself fuels the employees with feedback, opportunities for sharing and network, and a visible commitment to fostering community, then those employers will be propelled toward excellence by the very nature of the culture itself. Treating people honorably leads to honorable behavior. As Daniel Goleman points out in his book Emotional Intelligence, Leadership success or failure is usually due to qualities of the heart. In a recent article, Warren Bennis, founding chairman of the Leadership Institute at the USC Marshall School of Business, cites a survey that found nearly 2/3 of companies believe they use less than half their employees' brain power. Employees themselves were less optimistic. Only 16% said they use more than half their talents at work. If less than half of a body's organs were working, the body would not be considered well. Nor should an organization consider itself well if it is using less than half the brain power of its people. So the question is, how can we as leaders inspire people to show up in their totality? How can we create a meaningful environment that excites people and stimulates them to fully engage their whole beings so they're not sailing through their workdays at half-mast? In their book, A Spiritual Audit of Corporate America, business professor Ian Mitroff and organizational consultant Elizabeth Denton provide a compelling case that companies that foster a spiritual environment tend to have employees who are more creative, loyal, productive, and adaptive to change than companies that stifle spirituality. Mitroff and Denton conducted in-depth interviews with over 90 high-level managers and executives, collecting both qualitative and quantitative data. What they found is that spirituality is one of the most important determinants of organizational performance. People who are more spiritually involved achieve better results. In fact, they suggest that spirituality may well be the ultimate competitive advantage. Participants of the study differentiated strongly between religion and spirituality, viewing religion as a highly inappropriate form of expression, and spirituality as a highly appropriate subject for the workplace. Most believe strongly that organizations must harness the immense spiritual energy within each person in order to produce world-class products and services. And their perception of spirituality was that it pertained to the process of becoming, that it involved the continuing unfolding of the human spirit. If the company is not invested in the whole person, then the person will not bring their whole being to the corporate enterprise. Meaning and purpose are the top items on a lot of people's agendas. When survey participants were asked how these were imparted in the workplace, they offered the following, ranking from highest to lowest in importance. 1, the ability to realize my full potential as a person. 2, being associated with a good organization or an ethical organization. 3, interesting work. 4, making money. 5, having good colleagues and serving humankind. 6, service to future generations. And 7, service to my immediate community. Beyond a certain threshold, pay ceases to be the most important factor in work life, and higher needs prevail. The desire for self-actualization becomes paramount. Patricia Aberdeen, author of Megatrends 2010, sees the rise of spirituality in the workplace as a trend that is about to become a megatrend. To Aberdeen, the future will be one in which the spiritual transformation of capitalism will shift the American way of doing business from greed to enlightened self-interest, from elitism to economic democracy, from the fundamentalist doctrine of profit at any cost to the conscious ideology that espouses both money and morals. The coming megatrend, Aberdeen asserts, will not be driven by external, social, or technological forces so much as the internal dimension of change that will reinvent free enterprise. The precipitating conditions for this megatrend include the enormous stress people are under due to the economic and security crisis of the past few years, the impact of the 50 to 60 million cultural creatives for whom values upstage money and other trappings of success, a convergence of the movements of social responsibility and spirituality, and the ripple effect of the transformative personal and spiritual work that thought leaders are engaging in and bringing into their institutions. Spiritual intelligence is transformative because it removes our limitations, dissolves our blinders, and opens our eyes to the connecting threads that unite us all. The spiritually intelligent person understands that another's loss is his loss, another's gain is hers. The spiritually intelligent person makes decisions based on what's good for the whole, aware that we are intricately bound together like cells in an organ, each of us part of this living, breathing earth. And more people every day are coming into this new awareness, not necessarily able to articulate it, but able to feel it and delight in it. Spiritual intelligence is evolving through us as our DNA adapts to the stresses and complexities of the times. And there are choices we can make, actions we can take that actually cause our DNA strands to relax and unwind, allowing us to access deeper levels of creativity. It is creativity and originality that we need to be evoking these days as we search for solutions in every enterprise. And that process is a spiritual process, a journey inward. It is an exploration not of the known, but of the unknown and yet to be created. Our creativity expands as we deepen our awareness and tap into our inner dimensions, for this is the place where we discover that we are not our bodies, but that which is aware of our bodies. This is where we access the universal consciousness and draw it into our beings. And as we open ourselves to the greater wisdom, it speaks to us, through us, its brilliance and light, the perfect match to our deepest ponderings. There is nothing anyone has to learn in order to go within. It is simply a matter of quieting down, setting aside time, committing to a practice of solitude and silence. There are no rules to follow, no creeds to learn, nothing to memorize. All that is needed is just the willingness to take some time out of every day and look inward to the greatest gold mine of all. Mindfulness practices are their own reward, and people who are engaging in them are experiencing unique and positive results. An article in the Asia Times reports that Thomas Friess, engineer and vice president of Friess and Nichols Incorporated, changed his approach to business management after a 10-day Vipassana retreat near Dallas, in one of the 6 Vipassana centers in the United States. Vipassana, meaning to see things as they are, is an ancient Indian self-observation technique that, according to Friess, leads to clearer thinking, and clear thinking is good for business. Following his retreat, Friess took on the task of blending compassion and ethics with bottom lines and profits in his daily work. 18 months later, the Fort Worth-based company won the Best Engineering Firm to Work For in Texas, an award sponsored by CE News, a trade publication for civil engineers. The contest was based on employee satisfaction surveys, and CE News received 12,587 surveys. For Friess and many others, the value of Vipassana has gone far beyond the spiritual. As part of Xerox Corporation's commitment to revolutionize product development, over 300 Xerox employees have participated in vision quests to stimulate their creative juices. From New Mexico's deserts to New York's Catskill Mountains, Workers have quested after visions, communed with nature, and sought inspiration for 24 hours with nothing more than sleeping bags and water jugs. On one quest, after envisioning a rotting computer polluting a stream, a group of engineers committed to creating a recyclable Xerox machine. Back from the desert and at their desks, they got to work and came up with the 265 DC, a 97% recyclable machine, which has become one of Xerox's best sellers. George Zimmer, CEO of Men's Wearhouse, said in an online article that he constantly looks at his corporation as a place for the development of the human spirit. 13 years ago, when he decided to create a new corporate culture, he took one giant step in a new direction. He made employee fulfillment his company's first priority, followed by that of other stakeholders. After putting those values into operation, the $64 million business grew into a $1.4 billion international company with projections of $10 billion by 2010. For the past 3 years, it has made Fortune's list of 100 best companies to work for in America. Says Zimmer, I realized that our outer relationships were driven by the quality of our inner work environment. So our collective honesty, sincerity, integrity, responsiveness, authenticity, mutual goodwill, and caring for each other became my focus as CEO. In San Diego, Kyocera Corporation, a multinational company with over 60,000 employees, believes that spirituality belongs not only in the home or places of worship, but also in the workplace. The motto of a modern Buddhist priest, respect the divine and love people, is taught at some 160 Kyocera subsidiaries circling the globe. The priest's name is Daiwa, but he is better known by his secular name, Dr. Kazuo Inamori, founder and chairman emeritus of the company. In 1959, Inamori founded Kyocera and brought it into a position of worldwide prominence, stressing that the practice of environmental is necessary to show proper respect. In 2004, Kyocera reported net sales of $10.96 billion, with profits up 65.4% from the previous year. What I learned was that we must first think we can make it happen. If we keep telling ourselves, I know this would be ideal, but in reality is it impossible, then nothing will happen. Progress is occurring through us and in us as we enfold ourselves in the human community and unfold our gifts where they are needed. It is our very connectedness that ignites and unleashes our creative powers, and programs that foster awareness and relationships are the key to unlocking the wealth inside the corporate body. When the inner and outer, the spiritual and material are brought together, a synthesis of a higher order is born from the union of opposites. This is the art and alchemy of transformation, and it is dependent on the fusion of what once was separate. Jonathan Schell, a modern-day prophet, propels us forward with his compelling words. Because everything we do and everything we are is in jeopardy, and because the peril is immediate and unremitting, every person is the right person to act, and every moment is the right moment to begin. Wherever we are, whatever we're doing, there is always the chance to reveal the inner, to shed that light, to share our warmth with a shivering soul. Chapter 11. Local Brain, Global Mind. I was eating dinner with friends at a small Italian restaurant when 3 men with guns walked through the door. "Get up," they shouted as they approached our table. We were stunned and sat frozen in our seats, none of us moving. Two of them walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen, and the other came closer with his gun pointing. "Keep your eyes down and get into the kitchen now, and take your bags." By now it had sunk in that this was really happening, and we all stood up and headed into the kitchen, the gunman behind us. "Don't anybody look," he warned. "Just lie down on the floor and keep your eyes shut." We did as he said and took our places on the floor, along with the kitchen staff, who were already lying face down. He told the men to put their wallets on the floor, then instructed all of us to remove our jewelry and watches and put them on the floor next to us. "Keep your eyes shut," he kept shouting, while his cohorts collected the wallets and jewelry. They went into the office next, while one kept guard over us. I heard someone go through the swinging door, and then there was a long silence. I thought they had left, so I lifted up my head and looked toward the door, just as one pushed it open. He saw me looking and came at me with his gun pointed at my head, shouting, "I told you to keep your eyes shut." "I can't see anything without my glasses," I said, burrowing my head under my arms, and at that point the strangest thing happened. I saw the whole scene from above, as if I were suspended from the ceiling. As I viewed our bodies sprawled out on the greasy kitchen floor, powerless and terrified, I heard a voice in my head say, "This is what we've come to." And out of my right eye, as I lie there on the floor, fell one large, mournful tear. In this moment, my local brain and global mind became one. The local me was the victim, paralyzed with fear, worried for my life, grieving over an image seen by the global me, an image of my own tribe run amok. From that upper view, I was a witness, not a victim. I was the many, not the one, the we, not the I. Years later, as I think back on this event, I find that it gave me a metaphor for understanding the distinction between global and local, and seeing that they are two sides of one coin. My reality is simultaneously local and global. I am at once the witness and the witnessed, the creator of experience and the one who experiences it. I am like the cell in the organism, offering my vitality to the whole and taking my vitality from it. A singular and unique entity. I bring to the whole what no one else can bring, and doing that, I find my place in the family of things. It is at the intersection of local brain and global mind that our creative fire is ignited and fanned. It is here, when these poles are brought together, that original thoughts are conceived and born, that the future enters into us before it happens. It is the recognition of our oneness that causes the quantum leap to a higher level of thinking. Einstein wrote, "The world that we have made as a result of the level of thinking we have done thus far creates problems which cannot be solved by the same level of thinking in which they were created. Until we shift into global mind thinking, we cannot solve the problems that we have created with local brain thoughts. We have built a world based on our separation from each other, and it is unsustainable. To create a world that is just and sustainable, we must design and build with our oneness in mind, asking ourselves at every point, what is best for the whole? And that is why visionaries are needed so desperately now, because they operate from this place. They dwell in the awareness of oneness, and this consciousness radiates from their very beings, affecting everyone in their midst. When I think of thought leaders, I think of those who draw us after them, whose energy field, like that of a magnet, extends beyond the body itself, attracting others to the brightness of their light. It is true for all of us that our heart energy precedes us as we navigate through life, extending beyond us as an aura potent enough to affect those in our path. But there is something particularly uplifting about the energy of people who are aware of the threads that connect us all and whose work in the world reflects this knowing. We are strongly affected by each person's energy, as studies in this area are now confirming. Research from the Institute of Heart Math, IHM, in Boulder Creek, California, shows that our heart's field changes distinctly as we experience different emotions, and it is registered by the brains of people around us. On their website is an informal experiment with a boy, Josh, and his dog, Mabel, demonstrating how one heart field can calm another heart down. On their website is an informal experiment with a boy, Josh, and his dog, Mabel, demonstrating how one heart field can calm another heart down. Researchers monitored the heart rhythms of both the dog and the boy, then had Mabel enter a room by herself. Her heart rhythms were jagged and erratic. Then Josh entered the room and greeted Mabel, petting her and emotionally bonding with her. At this point, Mabel's heart rhythms made a significant shift, synchronizing with Josh's heart rhythms and staying close to his rhythms throughout the visit. When Josh got up and left the room, Mabel's heart rhythms clearly shifted again, becoming very spiked and jagged. Although the experiment was not a formal study, it appears that Josh's calm heart field connected with Mabel's heart, helping her to feel secure and relaxed. That we have an effect on others is a matter of fact. The kind of effect we have on others is a matter of consciousness. We can radiate blessings and light, or negativity and darkness. It is in our best interest to be mindful of our energy as we scatter it about, because thoughts can produce effects only of the same nature. Kindness to others favors a nervous system that is kind to itself, says the Bhagavad Gita. And Joseph Chilton Pearce says it even more clearly in The Biology of Transcendence. Every negative thought I entertain in my head, which I think is my own secret place, actually strengthens the negative field that sweeps our world. Every time I bemoan the negative world out there that I must suffer, I have supported and contributed to it through my moaning. My secret place in my head is not so secret after all. This is global mind thinking. It is countercultural, for we have been trained to think otherwise, but it is the very essence of original thinking and a prerequisite for visionary leadership. Before we can manage anything or anyone else in the outside world, we must first learn to manage our energy and thoughts, to synchronize our mind and our emotions for optimal performance. Then we will be ready to enter deeper levels of consciousness, increase our intuitive capacities, and tap into a creativity greater than we have ever known. Geneticists are discovering unused sections of DNA which are thought to contain the blueprint of the future. And research shows that we can influence our DNA. With the power of our mind, we can cause our own DNA to relax and unwind, allowing us to access more of its codes. In another study at the Institute of Heart Math, human placental DNA was placed in a container to measure changes. 28 vials of it were given to 28 researchers who were trained in generating and feeling feelings. Studies found that the DNA changed shape according to the feelings of the researchers. In another IHM study, leukocytes were harvested for DNA and placed in chambers to be measured for electrical charges. The donor, who sat in another room, was subjected to emotional stimulation, such as war images, sexual erotica, and humor. When the donor exhibited emotional peaks and valleys, measured by electrical responses, so did the DNA at the same time. This was also true when researchers separated the donor by 50 miles. Another study showed that when people touch or are in close proximity, one person's heartbeat signal is registered in the other person's brainwaves. More refined techniques have since been developed by IHM that indicate there is an energy exchange that occurs up to 5 feet away from the body, even without touching. The heart is a sophisticated information processing center with its own nervous system. It has the ability to sense, learn, remember, and make functional decisions independent of the brain. It sends messages to the brain and the rest of the body in 4 different languages: neurological, biophysical, hormonal, and electrical. And these messages cause our awareness to expand. Studies on the heart present compelling evidence that the body's perceptual apparatus is continuously scanning the future, leading to the heart's intuitive intelligence. Conclusions that the heart receives and responds to intuitive information were based on studies where a subject was exposed to both emotional stimuli and calm stimuli. The results also show that pre-stimulus information from the heart is communicated to the brain.